Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
Welcome. Ah, yes, and here we are again, the Cats in the Hats, 9 o'clock Saturday night on Manx Radio, Jumping In, the best in modern and contemporary jazz with myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's show. And can you believe it's the official end of winter? But don't go hanging up your wellies just yet, because although spring has sprung, it's usually got a fairly broad palette of tricks up its sleeve, not least to fox the wily gardener with some late frost. So, H, what has had you rummaging through the potato sack looking for the remnants of last year's fine crop? And what has firmly planted itself as one to watch this year alongside your parsnips, onions, beetroot, salad leaves and whatever else you've been manfully thrusting into the ground?
Ah, well, yes, beetroot you've got to be careful with. And parsnips, well, it takes forever, but they're great fun. Right, something to look forward to, speaking about springing up in spring, because on March the 8th there'll be a new one from Chris Potter out, Eagles Point. We'll be catching up with that. Brad Melder on piano on that, very fine indeed. Going back a bit to go rah with Billy Hart, very finely, and some shadow painting with Stan Saltzman.
And for me, well, we dance in the streets, we sing as we salsa, we get up with a grin, and we remember Mike Taylor. Here's Son of Red Blues, Brown Thursday from Neil Ardley and Friends. Neil Ardley and the new orchestra with Son of Red Blues, Brown Thursday, taken from Mike Taylor Remembered. Mike Taylor, a pianist, composer, part of the early British free jazz scene, born in 1938, he tragically died aged 31 after a long period of experimenting with psychedelic drugs, losing grip on life a little bit, but he was incredibly highly regarded by the musical community, and he wrote for Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker and Cream, as well as Henry Lowther, Ian Carr, and was a long-time associate of John Heisman. In his later life, when he was becoming unstable, he had been staying with various friends, but he was not wearing shoes anymore, quite often stayed in the streets for days. He became quite unstable, threw all of his compositions away, and they were rescued from the bin by Heisman and these arrangements, which Neil Ardley expanded into this memorial album. Recorded in 1973, it finally got to see the light of day in 2022, and that track featured Ian Carr, Dave Gelly, John Heisman, Henry Lowther, Barbara Thompson and Norma Winston. It's a gem.
It is a gem, that one. Cracking stuff. A great way to get going. I'm not going back quite as far as that, I don't think. 1988, Billy Hart. Always been a great fan of his drumming and the groups he's had. We saw a wonderful set with him in the strangest setting, but a marvellous set in Brussels several years ago, where it was in a club which was not a jazz club so much as a club designed for sort of grunge type dancing, really, more of a mini warehouse, and he was there with his quartet and played a sort of quite contemplative jazz set. So it was a bit of a strange setting, albeit the music was wonderful. Mark Turner playing tenor sax on this. But going back in the day, I always remember going way back on Gramovision days, Oshumer used to be a hot favourite in the car, in your car, I think, and mine for a while as well. Probably on cassette, I dare say, at the time. But another one came out roughly similar sort of period, was an album called Ra, which you don't see quite as often, but it's every bit as good. Here's Motional. Great stuff from an album we're just looking at. Doesn't the Gramovision stuff never seems to have really been reissued? Very popular back in the day in the 1980s. And like I said, Oshima used to be an album that we played on repeat to a fair degree. And there used to be a whole scutch of albums on Gramovision. Then I don't know, they went bust or went out of business. But you don't see a lot of their music kicking around in some of the... Maybe they just didn't release it to some of the streaming sites and such like. I don't know. This one I did pick up by having looked at the CD cover. I can tell you I got it in Reckless Records in Soho 2 or 3 years ago. Don't know exactly what. Billy Hart, Ra, and what a band as well. He really had the pick of the crop then. Billy himself, of course, on drums. And on that particular track, Emotional, we heard Dave Liebman on soprano sax, Eddie Henderson on flugelhorn, Ralph Moore on tenor, Kevin Eubanks at the guitar, Bill Frisell at the other guitar, on separate channels if you're listening on headphones. Mark Gray, who I don't know that well, playing the Oberheim synth. You said that sound, which sounds dated to my ears, but you're saying it's right back in fashion, that synth sound. The late great Kenny Kirkland piano, Eddie Gomez on the bass. Amazing stuff, and still sounds, other than that synth sound, which makes me think of the 80s, that. But what goes around comes around, like sort of Hammond organ and Rhodes piano and such like, back in fashion again.
Yeah, and new roads now. You've got Deep Pockets, and Ancien Belgique was where we saw it, which is a strange place. It's a huge concert hall, art assembly.
It was an odd place.
It has
all
this
standing.
we saw Snarky Puppy there, didn't we, a couple of years earlier?
That's right, they were downstairs. Were upstairs, weren't they? But all standing, not a seat in the house.
Not a seat, a bar at the back, no seats. Very, very interesting. I actually caught him some years earlier in New York, in Greenwich Village, playing in
Village Vanguard.
Sweet Basil, which is gone now, hasn't it, sadly?
I think there's a new one. Could be wrong.
There's a new one. I'll have to look out for that. We have to get to New York again, won't we? Next, for me, a fascinating new release on Act from violinist Adam Baldik and pianist Leszek Mulza, possibly two of Poland's most successful current musical exports, with both musicians freely moving between jazz and classical musical genres. This duet album, reuniting them after some 10 years since they last recorded together, is Passacaglia. Here's the title track. Passacaglia from the album of the same name, which is a series of predominantly original compositions played by Adam Boldik on a Renaissance violin and Leszek Mozdar often playing two grand pianos simultaneously, one of which is tuned to 442 Hz and the other one to 432 Hz, which gives that slightly unsettling microtonality to a number of the pieces. I'm a big fan of it, I have to say, and indeed a big fan of both musicians. And Passacaglia is definitely best for a late-night listening session, as it is both intimate and engaging. And many thanks to ACT for sending us a copy.
Indeed, super stuff that. Jumping in, Chris and myself, H, with you through until the top of the hour with some of the best modern jazz sounds on the planet, and one of the biggest names in sax jazz these days, Chris Potter. He's made himself into something of an A-lister, I dare say, and he has a new one coming out on Edition at the beginning of next month. You haven't got long to wait. 8th of March, Eagles Point will be coming out in what's described as a supergroup of supergroups. Chris Potter on sax with Brad Meldau on the keyboards, John Patitucci at the bass, Brian Blade at the drums. Dream of Home, the opening track on Chris Potter's new album Eagles Point on Edition. Chris on saxophones, Brad Meldo at the piano, John Patitucci double bass, Brian Blade drums. A real super group. An album a long time in the making, he says in the notes. Brad, John and Brian have been three of my favourite musicians, says Chris Potter, on the scene since I first met and played with them in the early 90s, and it was a great joy to bring them together to play on the project. A super fun album to make, and the depth of artistry and warmth of feeling they bring to every note is a huge inspiration to me. All leaders in their own right, of course, and that great track is one of those ones that builds from nothing, comes up to a nice sort of swing in the middle and a fair degree of intensity, and then just fades away again to some just piano chordings fading away and some great little cymbal sounds on the ride cymbal from Brian Blade. Not long to wait, like I said, that will be on general release on the 8th of March. Thanks very much to Edition, as ever, for sending us the preview.
Indeed, and more from them later. A great bunch of new releases coming out. A real scutch, indeed. Now to warmer climes, as my next choice basks in the musical heritage of her Cuban upbringing. Camila Cortina is the composer, pianist, musicologist and educator, and having originally studied classical music and composition, she then moved to Asia in 2010 and spent 5 years working as a musical director and pianist throughout Malaysia and Indonesia, before 3 years teaching and picking up her chops as a Latin jazz pianist, then moving to Berkeley for a 4-year master's program in composition and performance. From her debut recording, Sonera, here's the title track.
te entregas, vas por la vida cambiando las metas. Te cuelas, conectas y traes tu manada de hembras que luchan y se abren camino buscando un destino con mejores sueños, que no tengan dueños ni nada que se parezca. Lo importante es que crezcas y vayas subiendo, abriéndote espacio, luchando un pedazo de historia, en un libro que aún no está escrito y sin dar un grito, tu voz se oye alta, ya nada te falta. Te tienes a ti misma, a tu tribu y a tu fe, y aunque aún no lo ves, tu voz inspira a otras. Tu entorno alborotas y vas desprendiendo energía increciendo. Mira cómo observan y ahora toman nota. No dejes dudas de quién eres tú. Camina, sonera, y muestra tu luz.
Sunnier climes indeed. Sonera from the debut release of Cuban pianist and composer Camila Cortina. I know you've been there. You'd say you would go again, but
Yeah, I would, yeah.
yeah, a lovely release this, which just seems to bring sunshine into the room with every listen. I love the whole album. Camila says, Sonera is a reflection of the sounds and rhythms of my Cuban roots, reimagined through the lens of jazz, classical and world music. And to help her on this journey, she's joined on that track by Edmar Colon, some lovely soprano sax playing, Elizabeth Rodriguez lead vocals, Madeleine Savine backing vocals, Gerson Lazo Quarigia on acoustic bass, and Julian Meltenberger, great name, on the drums.
Yes, it is a great name. Another great name is Jelly Mold Records, which is where you'll find Stan Saltzman, or I think his latest. As far as I know, the last album he brought out under his own name, Shadow Painting, the Stan Saltzman Organ Quartet. We saw him still on fine form, getting older, as we all are these days, but he was playing at the London Jazz Festival with, I'm trying to think who it was with, it was one of the big band scenarios. He came in and guested, didn't he, when we were down there last year in November, and still blowing very nicely indeed. Great to hear him in this small setting, though some quite intimate, also ECM-ish style jazz on this one in his organ quartet. Shadow painting, as he says, it's all about, well, as you imagine, colouring in the shadows and those sort of spaces in between. Here's a track he calls Clover.
Hello, this is Katrine Windfeld from Denmark, and you're listening to the Manx Radio Jumping In with Chris and H.
Good stuff. Playing that one for John Duffield, I think. Yeah, I haven't seen John for a while. Hello, John, if you're listening by any chance. Our mate from the Southport Jazz Festival. Haven't been for that for a year or two. It's been going up and down a little bit, and but I believe it's back on the rails. We hadn't managed to get for a year or two for various reasons, whether it's not been in place or COVID, whatever the case may be. It would be nice to get back there at some stage. But I know he was also a fan of Gerald Wilson, and that was indeed Gerald in his prime. From some of his earliest albums, You Better Believe It. I think that album, two of his earliest ones for the Pacific label, a track called Straight Up and Down, with a whole host of people playing, and of course Gerald Wilson conducting. Wonderful stuff. I do enjoy Gerald Wilson. Really good swinging big band stuff with a modern twist, if you've never checked him out. And before that, shadow painting, like I said, on the wonderful Jelly Mould label. The Stan Saltzman Organ Quartet, Stan on tenor sax, Nick Smart, a wonderful player, nice guy too, on trumpet and flugel, Ross Stanley, the master of I think he's cornered the market for the Hammond organ in the UK, certainly. Not the easiest instrument to lug around, mind you, unless you've got a small van. Tim Giles on the drums, and a man of few words generally, Stan. We did have a nice chat with him at the 606 a while back, when he actually launched this album, I think, a year or two back in 2018, I think it was. And just on the notes, the track was called Clover, and on his notes for why it's called Clover, he says, for a four-leaf clover. Fair enough.
Short, but indeed to the point, and lucky, it would seem. We did have a word with Nick Smart too, really nice guy, and a great trumpeter. Well, once again, we have run out of time, but I did say we'd be revisiting these new releases from Edition label. Composer Mark Lockhart and saxophonist, a veteran of such pioneering bands as Loose Tubes, Perfect Houseplants and Polar Bear, of course, playing a pivotal role in each of them. For his new project, Smiling, Mark's assembled a great 13-piece ensemble with some of the best names on the scene. Mark Lockhart and Nathaniel Facey on saxes, Roland Sutherland on the flutes, George Crowley and James Elsop on clarinets, Laura Jurd and Mike Soper on trumpets, Jim Rattigan and Anna Drysdale on horns, Harry Maud on trombone, and John Paracelli on guitar, Tom Herbert bass, and Dave Smith at the drums. No piano, but I really hope we get to tour this band, because it'd be lovely to see them live. Smiling is going to be out on the Edition label coming up soon, 29th of March, and we're going to hear from it. Morning Smiles. See you next week.
Evening Smiles for now. See you.
It'll have to be.